One of the things that Illustrator does really, really well is type. A lot better than Photoshop. Typography is a lot closer to a vector-based situation than a raster-based situation. So I want to go over some of the things that you can do in Illustrator with typography. I'm not going to be going over the rules of typography. I will probably mention a couple of them, but looking to learn about the rules of typography, this is not the video. This is how to produce and control the letters and words and sentences in your Illustrator document. So the most important thing that you'll need to know is the type tool. There are a bunch of different type tools. They do a lot of different things. The one that we're going to focus on is the actual type tool. Now, it looks like this, and you can create point type or area type by doing one of two things. So let me show you how that works. So, point type is when you just single click, right? So I'm just going to single click. That is point type. I'll tell you a little bit about point type and area type in a minute, but area type is where you click and drag. Now notice that point type, if I bring this down here, it doesn't have an edge, meaning that I can keep typing forever and it'll continue to expand unless I hit return. Then it will start a new line. But it doesn't do wrap text automatically. You have to hit return. It acts differently than type that has a set bounding box or actually a set type box. So that is different than, let me get rid of all this. That is different than area type. Area type is actually a text box. So that text box has boundaries, and as the type hits the end of those boundaries, it wraps for you. When I'm adjusting the text box in area type, notice that the text adjusts with the box. It doesn't resize or reshape, but it just fills the space that I'm creating by moving these boundary boxes. As in point type, though, if I resize, then it resizes the characters themselves. If I hold shift, it will constrain those proportions. I can also hover on the outside edge. I can rotate it. I can stretch it vertically, which I do not recommend. I can stretch it horizontally, which I don't recommend. But there are a lot of different things that you can do. So if you click on this little deal, it will convert it to area type, and then it becomes a text box. But if you keep it point type, then you can hold shift and you can make it much larger, which is doing the same thing as changing it up here in your point size or over here in your character palette. But that doesn't work for area type or paragraph type unless I click on this and it double clicks to convert to point type, and then it does work like that. But if you keep area type, it has a text box. Point type does not have a text box. So the first thing to remember with the type tool is single click will get you point type, and click and drag will create a text box. There is an additional way to make area type. Area type will fill a space. So if you have an enclosed shape and you click on it with your text box tool, notice that the icon has changed. Normally it's creating a box, but the icon changes to show a shape. If I click on here, so as you can see, as I change the shape, it will fill that spot. I can also come in with my wide arrow tool, and I can adjust and make adjustments there on the handles, or I can continue to adjust this shape, and it will continue to fill that space. So hypothetically, let's say that you have some dialogue that you would like to be in a word balloon. You just type that out. copy it, get rid of this, create my word balloon. And then I'm going to fill that space with the text. Apple A to highlight that. We can make that smaller. Make it bigger. Let's center align it. Then you can come in and you can adjust your word balloon, which we'll go over in a different video. And there you have it, word balloon. This here can be adjusted so you can get closer or further from the edge. If you want the word hypothetically to be on top, you could do that. I mean, there's different ways to adjust it. All right, so one last thing about the type tool, and then I'll show you two other typography tools, is while you are in here typing, you may want to switch tools. So say you're done typing and you want to go to your black arrow tool, so you hit V, or you want to go to your white arrow tool, so you hit A, or you want to go to your brush tool, so you hit B. Notice that it's just taking that as you typing those letters. So you can go over here and you can click on one of the selection tools and it'll get you out of that type box. But I like hotkeys, and this took me forever to figure out. If you hit escape, then it automatically jumps you to the black arrow tool. So if you're ever inside of a text box or a point type and you hit escape, it will jump to the black arrow tool and will no longer take type commands as letters. It'll take them as hotkeys. Oh, there I did it again. Escape. Let's get rid of these. So let's say that I want a line of text to follow the basic outline here. How do I do that? Because I'm not going to have it fill that space. I want it to kind of roller coaster along this edge. Well, that is what the type on a path tool is for. The first thing that you need to do is have a path that you want it to follow. I'll adjust that in a minute. Okay, so we have a path here, and that's roughly what I want it to do. So if I want it to follow this path, I click on the Type on a Path tool, which is the third one down. I click on that path, and it turns the entire path into a line that you can type on. Okay, the other one that I wanted to point out, so we've gone over the Type tool, gone over the Type on a Path tool. I want to go over the Touch Type tool, which is Shift-T, or the last one on this list. This is new. What it does is, instead of coming in and editing entire words or whatever, or having to outline this, which I'll show you in a minute, you can click on an individual letter and you can adjust an individual letter, and it will keep everything still editable as if it is text. So that when you come back in here, you can still type. These aren't shapes, they're text. It changes what's going on over here in the character palette, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's really cool. So Shift-T, you have to hit escape first, Shift-T, then you can come in and you have the option to make it larger or smaller. You have the option to move it around. You have the option to rotate it. And it is still editable text. Okay, so let's say that you want to do something a little bit more than that. You can actually turn type into objects. And this is a really cool thing if you're doing sound effects or you're making a logo or something like that, and you want to distort the text in a way that the character palette or the paragraph palette or the new touch type tool doesn't allow you. What you can actually do is you come in here like this and you go to Type, Create Outlines, or my preference is always the hotkey, which is Command-Shift-O on a Mac. And notice that it turns those into objects. They now have anchor points and paths, and because they have anchor points and paths, you can actually change them and manipulate them. So I'm going to come in here like this, and I'm going to lock this down. I'm going to use my A tool. I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to bring this all the way over to the end. And then you can begin to adjust them as shapes, because they are now shapes. They have paths, they have anchor points, they will respond to the pen tool, the white arrow tool, the black arrow tool as shapes. no longer as typography. Be careful when you're doing this because you do not have control to come in and change a spelling error, rewrite a word. You've turned them into shapes. They are no longer type. All right, so let's talk about the character palette and the paragraph palette. Illustrator doesn't have an option to automatically generate lorem ipsum or filler text like InDesign does. Go to Google, search in filler text or lorem ipsum, and you can grab some there. Okay, create a text box by clicking and dragging, fill it with the lorem ipsum that you've copied, and then pull up your character and paragraph palette. If you don't see these characters over here, the A and the P, then you can go to Window, Type, click on one of them, and they should come up there. Okay, I'm going to break these out so that we can see them both at the same time. First, let's start with the paragraph palette right here. You can change the alignment, center align, right align. These are the justify options. Be careful with justify because it'll give you rivers, but you can justify with the last line being indented to the left, last line centered, last line right aligned, or last line completely spread out and looking ridiculous. You can indent on either side. You can indent just the beginning of a paragraph, or you can have the space before the paragraph after you hit return, or the space after the paragraph. Always come in here and choose Show Options and unclick Hyphenate. The auto hyphenate that it has, ridiculous, looks terrible, get rid of it. Then let's talk about the character palette itself. The first thing that you will see is you will see a bunch of fonts. You can change these fonts. You can come in here and you can type in a font. So if I want to go to Arial, type in Arial and it'll show up there, and I can choose one of these options. Notice that it changes as I scroll up and down. I can come in here and I can go Impact. It's just got the one. So let's, like Times New Roman or something. Okay, there we go. Under here are different options within that that font family. You can bold, italicize, whatever. Okay, this is the point size. So you can click up and down and increase or decrease the size. You can click inside of here and press your up arrow or your down arrow. You can click this drop-down menu for options that are arbitrary. Or you can come in and you can select this and you can type in 52.78, hit return, and it'll do that. So let's go to something readable. This is your leading. The leading is the space in between the lines. It harkens back to when they would set type by hand, and they had all the little metal pieces. There was lines of lead that they would stick in between the lines. Lead was different back in the day, so it didn't give them poisoning. It's a lot worse now. Anyway, you can increase or decrease the same way by using the arrows, by typing the arrows, by typing and hitting return, or by choosing the menu. If you choose auto, then it gives you the automatic settings that come with the font. Then there is the kerning and tracking that stretches out the spaces horizontally. Kerning deals with, let's make this bigger so we can see what's going on. Kerning is what happens in between characters, just single characters. So you can make them closer, just like everything else. You can inch them or whatever. Tracking works on multiple characters or lines. You can spread them out. You can put them closer together. So if you have an uneven rag that you'd like to get rid of, you can use tracking that way. So for example, if I wanted this line to go there, then I can come in here with tracking, and I can kind of just have that rag, that edge, that's called a rag, be a lot better. And spread out over the course of an entire line, sometimes you can't tell that there's much of a difference. If I were to compare those two, I could see them. That is kerning and tracking. This is your vertical scale. If you do that, it will stretch it vertically. You do this, it'll stretch it horizontally. This is superscript. This is rotate. So if you come in here like this and click on the rotate, it'll begin to turn the letters. So if I choose like 90, everything's sideways. Okay, 0 is normal, 360 is normal. So circle. This will change everything to caps. This changes everything to caps except the lowercase letters are small caps. This turns everything that you have highlighted into a superscript. This turns it into a subscript. This underlines it. Please don't use this one. This is a strike through. So there's different options. Don't use these two. Some of the more useful options that I went over in these palettes are also available up here in your options bar when you have the type selected there. You can change font and whatnot. I won't go too much into this, but I do want to point out at this point that you also have paragraph styles and character styles. Now, if you select something, well, first let's set one. So we're going to hold Alt or Option and press Create New Style. That brings up this window. We're going to call this Header. And then I can come in here and I can choose, let's say I always want Arial Black, and I want my size to be 21 inches, and I want the color to be red. Okay, then I click OK. Now, whenever I highlight anything, I can apply that character style and it will change that thing. And one of the great things about this, so let's apply this several times, is I can come back to this, double click, and I can change. Let's say actually I want my headers to be blue, and it'll change everything that has that particular character style applied to it, those attributes. So double click, and you can come in and you can change and you can play around with these. And this is a way to control large amounts of text, kind of like a CSS document to an HTML, as the way character styles and paragraph styles. Paragraph styles have a lot more about formatting and indenting and things like that, but they're a great way to control a bunch of different text boxes all at the same time in a specific Illustrator document. If you go to your type menu, you have your font, recent fonts, other things. You also have area type options. Area type options is talking about the text box. It's the area that the type is in. And you have different options with that. You can actually set a specific width and height. So if you wanted to be 8 inches wide and, oops, what did I do there? So if you wanted it to be 8 inches wide and 6 inches tall, and you can do that. If you click preview, it'll show you what that looks like. So it's showing you how that's going to work. Then you just click OK, and it'll resize that for you. You can also do some other interesting things. Type, area type, and you can create columns. Again, click preview. You have 1 column or 2 columns. You can choose the gutter size. You can increase that gutter size. That's the space in between the columns. You can decrease that gutter size to make them closer together. If you add rows, which might make sense at times, then you can choose how the text flows. It can either flow, in the Z pattern, or you can go all the way down and then back up to the top and back to the bottom. So those are some interesting options as well. I don't like rows. Just 1 row is fine. A few last minor things. If you see this little plus sign with a box around it, that's telling you that there is more text. So, for example, if I were to shrink this down, we'd see that there's more text there, right? So if we have this at a size like that, can just add more text as well. Then, with our black arrow tool, we can click on that, and notice that it loads the cursor with that information. There's two things that you can do with this. One, click and drag, and it creates a link that's saying from the end of this page, from the end of this text box, spill the rest of the text over into this text box. So it'll bring that over here. The other option that you have an existing text box already, or shape. Let's do a shape as well. I'm going to switch views here. I'm also going to add a shape. And you can come in here like this with your black arrow tool, grab this guy, load it up, wait for that link to come up. There's still more, so I'm going to grab him, load it up, click again. So now it's going to spill from this to this other text box to this shape, and if I wanted to do that again, I could grab it and click and drag. Okay, so you can create the flow from text boxes or shapes of how much text you have. Much like you can do in InDesign. InDesign is actually quite a bit better at doing large amounts of text, but that option is available. All right, so that should get you started with text and typography in Adobe Illustrator. Remember that the paragraph palette and the character palette can be found under Window, Type, Character. Remember that the Type tool, you click for point type, or you click and drag to create a text box and work in a type area.